Funding for this program was provided in part by the RE Synergy Foundation. Content for the Sustainable World.
My dad was an old-school surgeon who always wished he was a rancher, and a man who took life by the horns and ran with it. Think John Wayne meets Ernest Hemingway meets Teddy Roosevelt. One thing that always embarrassed me, though, was that if my dad saw something interesting wherever he was, he'd go ask about it. He'd start up impromptu conversations with perfect strangers about crop rotation, cattle genetics, or how to get all those pieces of firewood in the load to stay on top of that one little donkey. I was mortified as a kid. Well, I grew up, and now that's me. I married a perfect man with itchy feet who loves all things music and film and who makes documentaries just for the love of it. If you dump all of those things into a petri dish and let them stew for 25 years of blissful chaos, what do you get? Well, welcome to my life of vicarious agriculture. Come on along for the ride.
Okay, I'm Enrique Guerra, but I don't go by Enrique. Usually everybody calls me Kiko. It's my nickname, and it's given to me by my parents when I was very young. So I have no say-so on that, and everybody calls me Kiko. Yeah.
And you are a very accomplished man and a very well traveled and well-learned man, but you're known mostly for one thing right now in your life, and what is that?
Well, I think it's probably I'm an artist, and I paint and sculpt, and I've done it for many years now. And I enjoy what I do. I get to travel a little bit and visit different places, ranches and villages and different areas and paint. And a lot on location throughout my career, and I also do studio work. And later on in life, I did pick up on sculpting. I did not study sculpting, but it's very similar, just drawing and anatomy and the whole thing. It's all together. I mean, so I didn't have any difficulty making that transformation into creating sculpture.
So with your art, what is your preferred medium?
100% I usually paint oils, and otherwise it's just a lot of sketching, drawing.
So you have two pictures in back of you here that you're working on now, or two paintings rather. Would you tell me about them? That I do notice the texture immediately, but also the style and the content. Tell me about what you're painting now.
Okay, this one to my right is it's a kind of like a period painting. I like history. I like to incorporate it in some of my work. This one in particular is painted, or the area is in Port Isabel, which is right on the Gulf Coast, right close to where I live. And this happens to be a water buoy from turn of the century, 1800s. They would collect the water and drinking water and deliver it to homes that mainly at that time they didn't have well water or anything. So they would have to have drinking water or bathing water delivered. So you would see a lot of these water boys delivering with their donkeys, and I didn't include the barrels on this one, but they actually that was a thing during that time until they got proper plumbing.
That's hard to visualize when this painting has all that gorgeous blue of the bay in back and water everywhere and not a drop to drink.
Yeah, there was mainly the bay. It's a lot of salt water, so they would have to get. Some of them actually go to the Rio Grande and collect it in carts with bigger barrels, and then they would bring it to the cities, and then they use these smaller barrels to deliver it to homes. But it was a necessary thing because otherwise especially around this area, there was not a whole lot of water. once it got away from the river, it was not a whole lot as far as water. And this area was called the Wild Horse Desert. And for that reason, that there was nothing in between the Rio Grande and the Nueces River. There was not much in between as far as creeks or that had available water.
That's hard to imagine now, because we're here at a time when you've had quite a bit of rain and everything is green, just forever it's green.
Well, that's an exception. Usually this country does not look like it does right now. And this is the times that, you know, you get a great year like this year. I think we've had over 30 inches so far. I think our average for the year is 24 inches throughout the year. We had near to 25, 30 inches within 2 months. And, you know, we hadn't had rain in a week, and this could be the start of the drought for another 8 months, or who knows, you don't know. So this is a time that you think you can carry a lot of cattle. You get excited, hey, I can carry, you know, put another 100 cows in here. And then 6 months later, you don't know what to do with the feed bills and hay, and you know, you just don't know. So you have to always carry your capacity at all times, and it's always got to be prepared for to make it through a drought without having to, you know, put much back into it as far as, you know, hay or feed or that sort of thing.
Now, just for a frame of reference, we're not all that. We're in the southern part of Texas, but when we say southern, we mean we're a couple hours from Corpus Christi and the Gulf.
Yeah, an hour. Yeah, a couple, maybe hour 45 minutes, and we're only 35, 40 miles from the Rio Grande, the border, the actual Mexico-Texas border.
It's interesting that the mix of cultures in this area. The border between Mexico and the United States seems to be less important in general. It seems to be less important when you're looking at the landscape and the peoples. It seems to be an amazing mix of all of the above.
Yes. Yeah, it's hard to tell. Some people come here they've never been in the valley. Are we in Mexico? Because there's just a lot of Hispanics here, and not always the case. Early on in the valley, it was there were Hispanics, the original families that came with with the original Spaniards that came to this area to settle. And then through time, things did change. There was at some point there were a lot of people from up north buying land here. But it was very good farmland. So there were Germans, there were Polish people, there were just people from the Midwest would come because it was very fertile. As far as if you had a farm near the river, had water access to your farm, it's pretty fertile actually. You can grow just about anything.
The history in your family defies imagination to most of us. On this trip so far, we've been talking to people and mentioning Lonesome Dove. Mentioning Lonesome Dove, the late 1800s, and how the cattle drives came out of Mexico, and that seems like such an amazingly long time to many of us. But your family has a whole different time scale in this region. And we call it the United States and Mexico now, but this was New Spain. And before that, something else. So tell me a little bit about when your family came here.
Well, they not necessarily came directly from Spain to here, to this area. They came via, in the 1600s, they came from northern Spain, the Asturias. And they came to, I think it was Veracruz, which is a port in Mexico. And then they went to Mexico City. And then they went up to, I think it was Salvatierra, which I think is in, I think it's Guanajuato or Querétaro, I can't remember exactly. And then throughout time, they did actually made it all the way to on the Guerra side, because there are other family members that came from Mexico through other, not necessarily to Texas, but just across the Rio Grande, which was my grandmother. But the Guerras came from Mexico City and made it all the way to Mier, which is it's just about maybe 60 miles west of here on the Mexican side. It was one of the settlements. There were several settlements along the river from the 1700s that Jose de Escandon brought settlers to this area that was totally empty except Native Americans. And so they did the settlements along the Rio Grande, and there's several of them. They landed on Mier, which is west of here, like I said, about 60 miles, settled there, and then they at that point they were applying, people from Spain were applying for land grants from the government, from the King of Spain. So there were normally, the Spanish government would give them river frontage, if you look at old maps, you could see that if you had river frontage, they're all small tracts that very, very long. So because everybody wanted river frontage because there was access to the water. And then they were given land away from the river, but they had to have a well, an established well, and I think a home. They had to have a home and a well that was the only water that you could get. You had to dig a well, and then that you could apply for your land grant.
But well, not even what year, I'm going to say what century was this?
I think the Jose Escandon brought the settlers, I think it was 748, maybe, 1748. Okay. That's when they made it all the way here. Now, some of the settlements below this area, which is Cerralbo, which is just west of here, it's a little further south into Mexico. And I think they settled in the 1600s. There had already been expeditions here in the I think it was 1500s, late 1500s, in Cabeza de Vaca, and so there had already been explorers kind of looking throughout this. It was, I think the early explorers, they went through here. They weren't, of course, they were all looking for metals, golds, and silvers, and so I think they went through here and they just saw plains, not much of what they were looking for. But I think they probably designated it as, this is great for cattle. Once you got off the Mexican Rockies, which as the crow flies, you probably, I think if you drive 3 hours, 2.5 hours south of here, then you start in the foothills. And that's where then maybe it found a little bit of metals, iron, or maybe a little silver, I'm not sure. But I think it was the pressure from settlers from up north coming that pushed the Spaniards to say, hey, we need to settle this area because, this is part of Spain or New Spain, and we need to get our people up here. So that's how the incentive was, you're going to get land, and so you had families coming this way. During the Mexican War, Mexican-American War, then the Rio Grande became the boundary for Mexico. And so the families got split as far as land and nationality as well. So that's how our side of the family ended up with the lands on this side. There were, at that time, that whole area, I mean, the whole northern Mexico, there was nothing, just brush. And formerly there were plains, but with bringing, once the cattle were brought and all the drives and all that, it became, they spread the mesquite seeds everywhere and became brush everywhere. So my dad, when he was, I think it was 18, my grandmother put him out the ranch and said, well, we have to fence the property that weren't fenced. And so he contracted some folk from the area to clear all the senderos, they surveyed the land for the proper delineation of the property and started the fence. And that was when he was about 17 years old. And it probably took him a while to get everything done. And it was, back in those days, no electricity. It was pretty wild. So he got that done. And so that's how he started his ranching, kind of. At that point, they started bringing in a lot of the European, or the Brahma cattle, which was very popular then because it could withstand the heat, the sun, and it was also, there were a lot of ticks, diseases that they could also withstand somewhat. So he eventually cleared a lot of the brush, and that gave way to putting better grasses and putting more cattle in, mainly Brahma cattle. And then he mixed in other breeds like Charolais and mainly commercial. And then he started looking into the Longhorn aspect, because at the beginning, I mean, that was what was out there. There was no other type of cattle. So he started to build up a little herd as well of the Longhorn. And but he wasn't really looking into the genetics aspect of it as far as the purity until later. Until people became aware that they were actually, that the Longhorn was dwindling as far as numbers, and there were actually people looking for pure Longhorn, and that's when he thought, well, that's something that I need to look at, himself and start preserving the genetics as well. So at that point, I think the main problem with the Longhorn was that all the cattle that was being brought were breeding with the Longhorn, and then it wasn't. I mean, it was acceptable. It was just cattle for market, but it wasn't. They weren't really looking at establishing a herd of, keep them separated. It was all cattle, and it was, a big mixture. But what brought really the Longhorn was that, everybody started to fence their land, like my dad back in those days. So then, you had a more controlled environment, and you wanted, like everybody else, wanted better cattle. They're European. That's what they were looking for. And then the cattle that were out there, the feral cattle, kind of ceased to exist when you started fencing. Now, some of the more remote areas of Mexico, right at the foot of the Rockies, there were still a lot of Longhorn, because it belonged. Nobody had fences, and there were still the cattle that had been brought by the settlers from the Spaniards. And so there were still a lot of pockets of, especially up in the mountains. They couldn't quite get the European breeds because their ticks were, I mean, it's still, if you go up there, the ticks are ferocious, and they just couldn't stand the diseases and all that. So the only cattle that could survive was the Longhorn. And that's how he, once he, you know, realized that he needed to, you know, to actually get a pure Longhorn herd started. That's when he actually went out there and looked for those, select some of the cattle that were, he would go to this different owners and ask them, hey, do you have any of these cattle? And they would say, yeah, we have a few. And so he was, I'll just buy them. If you can trap them, I'll buy them from you. So he would kind of got the word out throughout that whole area, and actually was able to put the herd together that he had for a long time. So the, you know, getting back to this, you know, the Spanish, when they established that area, it was from the Pánuco River, which is the Tampico area, which is right at the foot of the Rockies right there. And all the way to the, I think it was the Nueces River. It was this, what they call this Nuevo Santander. It was a province of it's called Nuevo Santander. And it went all the way to, I think, close to Laredo. It was this whole region. And that's where some of the land grants and the settlements and things were happening. And some of the landowners would brand their cattle. That's the way you know, they could tell from, because back in those days there was no fencing. I think southern Mexico or central Mexico had less problems with fencing. They could control their animals because they had a lot of rock, and they made their fences were actually made out of stone. For miles you'd see these stone, but there's no rocks here, and there was nothing to hold the cattle in one place. So the nature of these criollo cattle, you know, they're very docile, so they will stick around where, you know, where the water was, and somewhat, but some became feral, and they didn't need the water, or they could, wherever they could get water. Some just ate cactus and just survived that way. But so that area, especially from the Rio Grande River to the Nueces, there was nothing, no settlements, nothing, because there was no water, really, to speak of. So you had a vast expanse of land and feral cattle, and that was kind of the right environment for this criollos to become what we know the Longhorn today, through just natural selection. But yeah, so this whole area was just a lot of wild cattle. If it didn't have a brand, it didn't belong to anybody. So everybody's just up for the taking. But yeah, so this whole area was definitely you know, where the kind of Longhorn kind of developed through natural selection. They can survive, and you know, the predators and diseases, and I mean, the cattle the Longhorn cattle we have, we don't do anything to them. They just survive. We never, since we've been here, we've never treated a cow for anything. And the ones that die, if it's old age, we just pick up the horns and put them up. But otherwise, they hardly have any problems like other breeds, especially Europeans. But
now, your father, when you describe the collection of cattle. You say trapping. These are somewhat like deer, more so than we would think of as cattle in many ways, it seems. Because you trap them and you catch them, but they're very wild, correct? Or they were at that point?
They can become very wild. I mean, we actually, in actuality, we have some cattle that there's always, in anybody's herd, there's always going to be some troublemakers. They're the last ones to go in the pens. They're the little on the wild side. So when we don't drive them because they're very even though that you seem they look like they are very docile, but and they almost look kind of like they're not paying attention to anything. And the minute you get on a horse and they see you coming, they're gone. If they see a little tiny opening, they recognize it immediately and they're out of there.
In this mesquite, it's very difficult.
Yeah, very difficult to get out. If they get to the really thick bottoms and they get in there, you can't get them out. So what we do here is all the water sources are fenced. So we just if there's no need to catch them, we just open up all the water. They can graze and water at different points. But if we need to trap them, we close all the waters and we only leave the ones in the pens, and they have to go in the water. So that's how we slowly trap them. But there's always 3, 4, 5 that will not go in the water and will refuse to go and drink. So they survive on, I don't know, cactus, however they get the moisture that they need, they get it. And they don't need to go in the water.
Now this seems to be your father's mission in life. That was the Longhorn Project.
Yeah,
Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I agree. Once he got into it, he just loved every aspect of it. He just he pretty much looked at him every day, and the calves and the cows. He knew everything about them. He kept an album and all the pedigree and the genetics and where it came from and everything. Yeah, complete attention to the breed. Yeah.
Now your sculpture has two. The vaquero is driving or leading. I don't know which two longhorns are tied.
Yeah, the story behind that particular one, because they asked me, well, can you do a vaquero from Texas? I said, yeah, that'd be fun. But I thought, well, just to have something, that's fine. But I thought I should add more to it, and add more to the story, so to make it more interesting than just a guy on a horseback that from a period of so in that period of time there were like a lot of feral cattle that if they didn't have a brand, it belonged to the King of Spain. So I think some of the neighbors could end up in your place, but as long as they had a brand, I think you could say, hey, there's some cattle here, of yours. But if it didn't have a brand, then it needed to be, and so they would actually go and catch. So the story behind this is that they would go out in the brush or out in the plains, whatever it happens to be, and they would rope the wild cattle. And they would have to team up, as they call a junta. And they would catch two animals, and then they would tie them together. They would put a rope on one, put the other one on the neck, and they would hook them up with this little hook. So they would have like, kind of like a lasso kind of thing, and then there's two little pieces, one little piece of wood and a loop, and then it goes around like a little button kind of thing. And they would hold those two together, and then they would braid the tails of the two animals together, so they would by the end of the rope and the braid, they can only go forward. They couldn't, everybody, one would pull against the other, and then they just finally would give up and go straight. And that would actually take them back to where they needed to be, or brand them, or whatever, slaughter them, or whatever needed to happen. So I put that little story together. So if you see the cows, they're got the braided tails with the little hook and all that. So this guy's driving him towards the headquarters. So I thought that was kind of the idea that I wanted to add to it, and it worked out, I think. I think markets for grass-fed and low-fat, and I think that the breed is. I mean, it fits that pattern of as far as beef, I think it's very healthy. As far as very lean, flavor is very, very good.
And you would know because you're quite
the flavor is excellent on the Longhorn. It's very different from. It's really good. I find it. It makes great stews, very flavorful. And I think with the lack of water these days, things are changing, and the Longhorn can survive it. If you don't have a lot of water or very marginal, right now, like we're talking about how green it is, but when it gets tough, which is most of the time, they do very well. They have very little impact on the environment because they're smaller animals, and they can survive on things that no other cattle can even eat.
Well, I agree as to the future of a drought-tolerant, hardy, sturdy animal. And I would say that in your family, you have an appreciation of art and history, and your brother is a restaurateur with an appreciation of art and history.
Yeah, definitely.
And your wife is a chef and a blogger. And with your family history, I would say that there's a wonderful moment to bring this animal to the public attention and the story behind it, what it means. I think that's fantastic.
Yeah, I think as far as commercial aspect and for the future, it's nobody knows really, but people are becoming more aware of the organic aspect of it. If you don't need to vaccinate your cattle or put hormones on it. A lot of people don't want to take the vaccine right now because they're afraid of it, but they're okay with all these vaccines and cattle and beef, and that's okay. I mean, there's a little disconnect there that I think people are coming around. Hopefully, the market, the people will dictate the market, and hopefully maybe there'll be more appreciation of this breed, and maybe some of the breeders can actually market the beef in a certain way that it's more appealing, or not more appealing, but it's more, maybe can reach more people. It's hard to say, but I think some people are headed in the right direction, with marketing their Longhorn, beef and that sort of thing, which it's all good. It's a little forward movement in the right direction.
I agree 100%.
Yeah. So,
well, thank you so much for sitting down with us.